All right, so in this video, what really want to talk about is more of, I guess, just like couples, how we can struggle with communication. And I know communication for us was pretty tough, just starting out. And sometimes we still got our little, times where we just don't communicate the best with each other. But I think like communication is just important, especially in a couple, with a couple or whatever. It's important in other areas as well. So, even in, work, communicating at work, communicating at home, communicating with your children, with your wife, just everything, communication is important. And so what we want to talk about, I guess it may be a few videos, but we just want to talk about the communication just with, you know, I guess spouses or whatnot, just with each other. And so for just you dealing with your partner, there's a lot of ways that you can get communication, um, just kind of twisted in a lot of areas. So even when you think about, just some of the communication styles can be a problem for couples. And, a lot of times is, in marriages or relationships, a lot of times what happens is, the lack of communication can either make or break whatever relationship you in. So if you have one person who's kind of caught up in, you know, being more passive and the other person is outspoken, it can be kind of deadly when the person who is passive is just not speaking what it is that they're trying to convey. And then, you know, vice versa on the flip side, if the person who is more outspoken is always talking. So I feel like I'm always talking right now, so I ain't even let you talk yet. But yeah, so I guess, just talking about um, communication. What do you feel like something was? What do you think it was something that we struggled with? As far as communicating. I think let's just talk about like something how we communicated with each other. Like what were some of the things that we had to get past? Would you say that we had to get past things that we had to get past?
What we had to get past,
Yeah.
I would say we had to get past, you mentioned earlier, like our style of communicating. Well, I don't know if style is a good word for it, but the way we communicated, and I'm thinking like in our tone when we were communicating, I was, or I am more of, I don't like it when I feel like you're yelling, or I don't like it when I feel like you're being demeaning, or if you're treating me like, I feel like if you're treating me like a child, things like that. So I know a lot of the times when we would get into our conversations, you would get loud, and that would deter me a lot from wanting to continue to participate in the conversation, because at that point, instead of realizing that was a part of your makeup, your personality, like you're just a passionate person and you tend to get loud when you speak, no matter what it is. Like I've said, I've always said to people, like, you could be talking about a basketball game and be like, yeah, they was running down the court and started to uh, pick up the pace and started to get this ball in the net and blah blah blah,
Yeah,
whatever.
you don't know a lot about basketball, but
But
good.
just the escalation, even from that, you telling, sharing that story, you're just a loud person. And me, on the other hand, like, I don't feel like I'm loud in that way. So when I felt like you were being loud with me, it automatically took me to a state where I felt like you were disrespecting me, belittling me, and things like that, which
Hmm.
made me disconnect from the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and I can see it a lot too. Uh, I don't know, like you said, I think that was one of the things that used to frustrate me so much is because I don't know if you realized it, but you always said I used to cut you off while you were talking, but you always cut me off too. But it was just my cutoff was a lot more dramatic than yours, I guess, because I kind of got excited, and for me, it was more like I think something that was in me as far as like just getting excited, like as we talking in the conversation, it's like I've been trying all this time to convey something to you, and it don't seem like it's working. But then it's like as soon as I feel like the light bulb goes off, and I'm excited about, ooh, I found another way to be able to, say it to you, and I'm thinking that you know, are gonna get it. So, I'm speaking a little louder, uh, putting a little more emphasis on it, and really just trying to let you see the point. And I know, like you said, even what you shared from your upbringing and stuff, as far as like most times parents would loud talk you, or tell you to be quiet, and they speak over you and stuff. And I think you kind of felt like I was taking your voice away from you and not letting you speak. But for me, I don't think that was it. And so I don't know. I think back to where like we couldn't finish a conversation. Period. You know what I'm saying? It was always as soon as we get to talking. You know, I think one of the wrong things that we did a lot of times was talk about like if you had an issue that had been building up, I had an issue that had been building up. You was more so like this for real. But I think you would kind of let those things pass a little bit, but not really. Like you'll hold them for later, and then so when it's time to talk about them, it's almost like you at a level of you just can't take no more, and you finally get everything off your chest, and you pulling stuff up from like a year ago or 6 months ago, and I'm just like, well, like what the heck, like where is this stuff coming from? And so I think you know when we finally got a chance to talk, I think we talked about things at the wrong time. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, we talked about stuff when it came to a head. You know what I'm saying? If that makes sense. You know what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying? And so I think that was kind of not the best time to talk about it because at this point you frustrated, I'm frustrated because I'm asking you what's wrong. You telling me ain't nothing wrong, but I know something's wrong. I'm like, hey, something wrong with you? You like, nah, I'm good. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, you sure? Nah, I'm good. Everything's fine. And then you'll go through cleaning the whole house up, everything except my stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, hold up, bro, something got to be wrong. Because you didn't did everything for the boys. You didn't cook dinner. You didn't, swept, did the house, folded all the clothes up, did everything, and my clothes wasn't folded up, or my clothes wasn't, what I'm saying? Whatever. You did everything, even if you get to sweeping, you were sweeping around me, and I'm like, what's going on? You know what I'm saying? I know something's going on. You just didn't want to talk about it because we couldn't talk about it. And so, like, I felt like every time we talked, it was always an argument and stuff. But I do remember, like, one thing that we did in our communication was, just wrote stuff down.
Oh wait,
Like,
let me say
yep.
something. So I think with you bringing that point up, like I didn't speak about things until they were pretty much brought to a head. I think part of that was from my experience of not being able to speak, like from my upbringing and stuff that you talked about. I think that was a result of that. Like not having the opportunity to speak.
Hmm.
I was being shut down a lot, by the adults that parented me or the adults that I was around, period. Like, I was actually taught, like, basically speaking up was disrespectful. And I shared the one instance where the kids in the neighborhood, this neighborhood where I lived at, the kids in the neighborhood were doing something. I don't remember exactly, but they were doing something. And so I was a part of the crowd, but I was one of the ones that was not participating in what they were doing. But one of the adults came and knocked on the door and was telling my parent, like, these kids were over here doing blah 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 and your child was with them. And so, like, I remember being at the door and was like, oh, like, that wasn't me. And I instantly got shut down by my parent, like, be quiet, you don't talk back. So it was basically the adult said I did it, and that's what it was. Like, I didn't have the opportunity or the right to speak up for myself, to take up for myself in that instance. And in a lot of instances, that's how it was, you know. So I think like that kind of crippled me, so to speak, of being able to um, grow into being able to be more like communicative in speaking about things that were bothering me in the moment. And as you said, I feel like once they got to that point where I was just already so overwhelmed or irritated, like it didn't matter to me then, because I was
Mm-hmm.
mad enough to speak out of my anger, or you know. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, um, it's like, okay, going back to what I was saying too, as far as like our communication was so messed up that we couldn't really get through a conversation, couldn't get through, an argument. Like, and arguments ain't all bad. Sometimes you just have to, state your case and listen to the other person's case. That's what I mean when it comes to the argument. But anyway, I think like one of the things that we had to do was just write letters to each other, and this was in the pencil and paper days. I know people ain't really doing that, so I think at today's time you can probably use like your notes app or something like this, anything, but I think like remember what I think the rules was. It's like you had to write the letter to the person. You wrote the letter to the person, and then the person who received the letter would uh, you would have to read over it. I think was it 3 times. I think the first time you had to read over it just to get it. Then the
just to
second
read it.
time you had to reread it and make sure that you really read what you thought you read, and then you had to pray over it. And then the third time you wrote it. I mean, you read over it again just to make sure everything was everything. Make sure you covered everything that you wanted to say, and then you went ahead and wrote your response. And so I think when we did that, it helped us in a lot of ways because what it did, like instead of us talking over each other, you were able to hear the other person's, I guess, like full thought uninterrupted. Because sometimes I know even for me, I'm good at thinking I can finish somebody's sentence. So when somebody's talking and they get into like I think I know where the point is, I can go ahead and assume that I know what they're gonna say, and I think you had a little bit of that in you and stuff too, because I think that's how we kind of got into some of our arguments. But I think it was just helpful. Yeah, it was helpful. I think it was helpful though.
It was very
Yeah,
helpful. I
because
agree.
like I think it did allow us to be able to hear each other, and I think today, we listen a lot better than we did back then, and then we got a lot more grace with people because I know you crazy, I'm crazy, and yeah. So, but I do think that like we listen to each other a lot better than we did at first,
Hmm.
and so I think that was a good practice for us, was just kind of getting through that. You know what I'm saying? And so, um, yeah, I think that was definitely dope. And so, I do feel like that was one of the things that helped a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
You know what I'm saying?
I
And
agree.
how we communicated. You know what I'm saying? Because you know, I think in the midst of an argument, you almost feel like the person that you talking to is just against you. You know what I'm saying? Got something against you. But once you able to hear the full side uninterrupted, it comes off a lot better. You know what I'm saying? And one of the practices is as you reading the letter, don't try to input your own attitude in these letters. You know what I'm saying?
That's
Because
what I was
sometimes
gonna
you can
speak
read
on.
these letters and stuff and start thinking, especially girls do the head thing, all this and that. She said this and that and this and that, this and that or whatever. I don't want to wash the dish. I don't want to help you cook. I don't want. It's like nah, like what I'm saying. I think don't read it with attitude, and I think that's the reason that you kind of read the letter a few times just so you can
Yeah.
get the full intake because the first time is just you reading and you still your blood still might be boiling, heart beating fast. You know what I'm saying? I feel like you almost like Scarface on that movie. You want to go to war? I'll take you to war. Type deal. But yeah, I think I think it can definitely be helpful to communicate in that way. Just so you can hear that other person's heart. I think y'all done been together and y'all together and possibly married and stuff and I don't think the person really has bad intents, but I think, we just fail in so many areas of communicating, and the older that you get, the harder it is because you have been communicating the way that you have been without that other person for so long, you know what I'm saying? But I
Mm.
think me and you been together since we were born for real.
Ooh,
Nah, we've been together for a nice little minute.
a
So
nice little
yeah, so I
minute.
think we've had to grow on communication with each other. Either saying things that we didn't feel like saying. And I think even the thing of like what we agreed on too is not sweeping things under the rug. You know what I'm saying? I think that was one of the things that was helpful for us because a lot of times you can go and maintain or think you maintaining the areas, but you sweeping everything under the rug. But you know, even as you think, just that thing of I know it's kind of like figurative. How you say it, man?
Figuratively.
Figuratively, yeah. So I know it is that, but you know what I'm saying. I think like it's not literal that you sweeping things under the rug, but if you think of it being literal, if you keep sweeping stuff under that rug, one day that pile gonna get so big,
Mm.
you gonna trip over, you gonna bust your dang on head. So, like
Mm.
stop sweeping everything under the rug. But when you agree to say, okay, man, we gonna talk about it, right? When you like, okay, we gonna talk about this situation, it it don't have to be like right then. You know what I'm saying? Give both people involved the time to be able to, open up when they ready. Just know
Mhm.
that it has to be dealt with. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's one of the things we made that agreement with. Like, it's gonna get dealt with, but right now is not the time. You know what I'm saying? And so,
Yeah, because I
like,
think also with that, like what you were saying, just being considerate
hmm
of that for one another. Um, Damien is the type, he wants to get on it now and now. If it's something that, needs to be handled, he's very quick to be on it.
hmm
And I think for me, on the other hand, I'm a thinker. So I want to think through things. I want to kind of think through presenting it, think through my own thoughts of it, and kind of like way before I go
hmm
forward. And at first, we didn't get that for each other.
hmm
Like, I was irritated as heck with him. Like, how you gonna force me to talk? Like I said, I'll talk when I'm ready.
hmm
And he was irritated with me, like as heck.
hmm
Because he's
Yeah.
like, if it's a problem, let's deal with it now.
Deal with
Let's
it. Get
get
it
it
out the
taken
way.
care
Yeah.
of.
hmm
And like he said, we agreed, like, yep, we will get it handled, but let's give each other the space to be able to, come to our own terms of being ready to,
hmm
talk it over and handle what we needed to handle. So yeah, that was I think for me that was a pivotal point also, like in our growth and learning one another and understanding each other as well.
hmm And I think like just being 100 though, I think like some of the best times can be like, you know, like after a time of like intimacy or something, you know what I'm saying? And I'm just saying like, like yeah, like I feel like your mind is more open to each other and it can be something that, even as you come back to talking about an issue, um, it doesn't have to be like here's a problem that we have. You don't have to address it in a problem way. You know what I'm saying? So as you go, like, hey, look, let's just talk about such and such, man. We just,
Mm.
had what they call it relations or something like this. So it's like, you know what I'm
What they
saying?
call it.
And then you just jump in like, hey, remember we got to talk about that bad issue. But it's like, hey, baby, remember such and such. Like, are you good to kind of talk about that. And I think you have to be one, you have to be open and ready to help fix, because I think even being in a relationship, y'all are there to kind of help each other out. You know what I'm saying? You're not there to make a person do what you want them to do, but y'all are there to just kind of grow together. So,
It's a
if
partnership.
sometimes talking about hard stuff is part of the growth. And so, um, as you get together, you just pretty much have to, find the right time to address the stuff. And the right time to address the stuff is definitely not during the time when it's heated. Like, don't even try to talk through it. You know what I'm saying? Understand that one person may say, "Hey, look, I need a minute." The other person may be like, "Nah, we talking about this right now." And so, like, give each other time, but then also, you don't have to go every day, every minute, reminding, hey, remember we got that issue, remember we got that issue, remember we got that issue. Sometimes give the other person that time to bring it up. But,
I
also,
know for us,
yeah.
we even came to a point where we were like, okay, we're going to give the time, but let's make it this weekend or let's make it
Yeah,
a couple
yeah,
days or whatever.
yeah. And so, yeah, anyway, like, as y'all together, if you together with, like your spouse, your partner, whatever the case is, like, work on communication. You know what I'm saying? Talk to each other, because especially one of the things I see real quick, and I think this is probably one of the last things we'll talk about, but I think, like, me and Ro, we talk about everything. You know what I'm saying? And, like, there's certain things that, like, you got to have certain people that you talk to about certain things. But, for the most part, like, I know Rose, she knows me, you know what I'm saying? And, like, we talk so much because, like, I remember just saying, too, I don't know if you remember, but I brought it to you, and I'm just like, look, if we going to be together, we got to know each other. You know what I'm saying? Because I would hate to, like, even be in my own body and not know what half of me is doing. You know what I'm saying? Or half of me feels. I don't. I would hate to be in my own body and not know what part of me is feeling and stuff. So if we gonna be together, even like the scriptures say, like the two become one. Uh, I think, you have to know the person that you're dealing with. You have to know what makes them tick. You have to know what, bothers them, what makes them happy. Like, just because, like, if not, you just living your whole life with basically a stranger or
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. And so, get to know the person, talk more, open up, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had to ask you certain times, like when I do talk loud, like, how does that make you feel? You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? And I think, when you conveyed it, it made me understand that, you wasn't just shutting down because of me. It's like you were shutting down because of the situation, not because of me. And so then once you knew that my offense of getting loud was just my excitement, it didn't offend you, knowing that he's not trying to be like my parents and loud talk me or whatever. He's pretty much like just excited, and that's just the way he is. You know what I'm saying? So I
Mm-hmm.
think, like, if we didn't know each other like that, you know what I'm saying, and didn't communicate that with each other, then we would have been lost with it. So
Right.
yeah. But yeah, I hope any of this stuff that we said has been helpful. And I'm Damien, and you
I'm
are
Ro.
Rosita. Yeah, don't call her Rosetta because she's gonna get mad. Don't call her what, like a
I'll
bunch of
give
names.
grace. I don't like Rose.
You know, like Rose. Can I call you Rose?
I like that song.
But yeah. But anyway, yep. I'm Damien. It's Rosita, and yeah, like I said, I hope this was helpful. And if you have any more, um, I don't know, any other topics or anything that you feel like you want us to cover or whatnot, or just talk about. Like, we just transparent, just being here, sharing our lives and stuff. We don't have it figured out. We don't have the answers to everything, but we can kind of tell you what we did, or, some of the things that we know from others who have, you know, like, just experienced walking together. And so, yeah, we hope our lives are helpful to you, and just hope that it can be used in some sort of way. So, until the next video, we are out. Peace.